And we can go live.
Meeting for the Joint Appropriations Committee on March 30th. Representative Kinner.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Schwartz.
Here.
Representative Simpson.
Excused.
Excused.
Representative Simpson.
Excused.
Thank you. Representative Stith.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Excused.
Thank you. Senator Kinsky.
Here.
Senator Steinmetz. Chairman Perkins excused. And Chairman Nicholas.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, welcome, everybody. We're going to work through our interim topics. So did we have a handout to look at? Right. Yep. I did. So Don, you just want to walk through them?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This meeting is to identify interim topics for the 2021 interim. All chairmen received a letter from Management Council and specifically the presiding officers, Chairman Dockstetter and Vice Chairman Barlow on March 23rd. Your topic requests are to be submitted to Management Council by the close of session, which would be April 7th. Council will be meeting on, I believe it's April 14th, 16th to consider, yeah, that's correct, Friday, April 16th to consider and approve their interim topics. The topic direction are to be reasonable as it relates to committee and staff time, to be described with specificity in order to provide clear direction. It can include a continuation of a priority from the 2020 session, but should not be redundant. And it should be unique and not duplicative of other committee requests. At the April 16th meeting, Management Council will prioritize the topics as well as consider duplicative topics. A couple of things to keep in mind for the upcoming interim. If you desire to identify a tentative schedule, you may wish to include whether or not you wish to identify a location of the meeting or whether you want to continue the use of remote or hybrid meetings. And it's also encouraged that you schedule, to the extent possible, your meetings at least 6 weeks apart. And we are prepared to even tentatively schedule the December and January meetings for budget hearings if you so desire. With that, Mr. Chairman, I think you all have a handout which provides submissions from members of the public, interested parties, and primarily individual legislators. This document's about 6 pages long. I believe there are 10 identified proposed interim topics, although I would suggest that 4 of them are really duplicative, so that would leave 8 unique topics.
Okay, Mr. Co-Chair, do you just want to walk through these and then prioritize them, or what's your, or do we want to take first motions from the floor to add any additional ones? What's your pleasure?
Why don't we, well, if we do, why don't we go ahead and take some additional questions and then we can't prioritize unless we know what the name is.
Okay, are any other additional topics other than those listed on this list? Maybe we ought to walk through the list so we know what's on it.
Okay, go ahead.
Don?
Mr. Chairman, item number 1 on the top of page 1. This was an outgrowth of the budget discussions back in December of 2020. There are 2 components here, the use of unfunded leave liabilities or how to pay for accumulated liability of sick leave and vacation leave. I think this topic was specific to small agencies that had a significant number of retirements. There was an additional topic related to leave, and that was the use of expenditure savings. This is a separate and distinct topic, use of vacancy savings to provide funding for other personnel, enhanced or increased compensation, or the like. Both of these came out of the December budget discussions. If there are no questions, the second topic at the bottom of page 1 is the Wyoming retirement system, and particularly the structure and authority for investments and opportunity to coordinate with the investment funds committee on their investment processes.
Do we, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, Dawn, is that broad enough? I'm assuming it does when we talk about benefits, costs, and structure, and explore coordinating investment efforts. Would that also include review of investment pay and how that maybe, you know, at least a review of how that's worked and how that's worked in the last year or so? I think they've had a couple pretty good years where they may have triggered that and just see how it worked.
Absolutely, and I've noted that we can add that to the description. You also bring up a good point. That report on performance compensation for both the Treasurer's Office and the retirement system are directed to the Select Committee on Cap Finance as well.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if it would be appropriate to include consideration of the fire aid fund in this topic.
Incentive compensation. So those come to us and CAP. Yeah.
So the answer, I think that's another listed topic. So the question was, as part of retirement, should we look at fire aid?
Yeah.
It probably
I mean, if we don't ignore it, it's not going to go away. Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Co-Chair,
Go ahead.
so JAC is the home committee for the retirement system, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So I think we ought to at least have the opportunity to do it. That's part of it. And if nothing less, at least educate everybody about where we're at, and where we're headed. Okay, next.
Mr. Chairman, item number 3 appears at the top of page 2. This interim topic is related to post-secondary education governance. You'll recall that section 337 of the 2020 budget bill directed a study and provided no funding for the University of Wyoming governance study. Technically, the Joint Education Committee was charged with overseeing that study. I will mention that the research division, I believe, has prepared 5 different white papers related to the UW's current governance and comparators with other states over the last year. There has been no consultant hired to date.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
so in this descriptive paragraph, 1, 2, 3, study authorizes 2020 Senate File 1, Section 337, and it says the committee will coordinate. Is the committee referred to there being the Education Interim or Joint Appropriations Committee? The committee will coordinate with the Select Committee on Community College Governance. Is it proposing that we will be doing that coordinating as a joint appropriations committee?
That's my presumption is we'll just be in lieu of the education committee.
So we're just going through the topics. We'll discuss them later, or do we entertain questions?
Yeah, I think we're just kind of going through them.
Okay, well, let's go through them. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, item number 4 is the continued study of ETS, or Enterprise Technology Services. At your January and February meetings, you did direct ETS with a fairly extensive task list from the Barry Dunn report, as well as expected reports over the interim from ETS.
And with that, I would include responses from YDOT on our recent request to them on how they go about implementing and following up on the RIS system.
Item number 5 appears at the top of page 3, and I might suggest that it appears to staff that this is identical to the last item on page 6. So a submission by Representative Stith and Representative Nicholas. These both appear to relate to pre-qualifications and specifically Senate File 6 from this session, which was not recommended favorably from the House Appropriations Committee last week.
So our thoughts on that is we would form a kind of a working group committee composed of Representative Larson and whoever wants to do it on the Senate side. And Stith, and kind of rework it like we did the contracting bill from the last year. They just put a lot of work into it. And so that's our thought on that one. Okay, next.
Item number 6 in the middle of page 3 relates to the American Rescue Plan Act funds and the expectation for a potential special session this summer, and JAC potentially being tasked by Management Council to take the lead or at least be involved in the initial preparation for the legislation for that session.
And so committee, from what I understand, this will be a job that we'll probably start on in April in order to develop the mechanism and the framework for the special session whenever that occurs, late June or mid-July. So we'll probably have 2 or 3 meetings doing this, along with work group sessions for it. So when we talk about other topics, I think this will probably be our #1 priority, at least for the first half of the biennium of the fiscal year. Next.
The next item on the bottom of page 3 is not a suggested topic, as I understand it. It's a request for funding only, specifically that daily pay and per diem for JAC members to attend the State Treasurers Conference. This conference typically occurs in the last week of August, potentially the first week of September. I might mention at this time, just because it relates and it wasn't mentioned previously, a question whether the committee desires to continue to proceed with the data book subcommittee and the mental health substance use subcommittee. At the top of page 4 is the next item for consideration. This, I believe, is similar, if not duplicative, to the request at the bottom of page 5. These relate to Senate File 121, or more generically, as stated on the top of page 4, opportunities for budget simplification and transparency, including elimination of accounts and streamlining of the funding process.
I think I brought the bill to get rid of the brawl 2 years ago, and I couldn't get it out of committee.
You're ahead of your time.
Yeah.
Your time has come, Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay, next.
At the bottom of page 4, item number 8 appears to be some continuation of the community college task force, and would look at sustainability of the funding model for community colleges, including mechanisms to generate additional revenue through a statewide mill levy.
So the task force, that was created by Management Council, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Yeah, and I think that myself and Senator Wassenberger chaired that task force. So this just takes the task force and kind of moves it over into our plate. In essence, is that a suggestion?
Mr. Chairman, and I think it's one component of the task force, not the entire breadth of work that the task force was tasked on, specifically related to the opportunities for sustainable funding alternatives. Mr. Chairman, I think the last two have been discussed previously in other topics.
And on the last one, on SF 121, is that, my question, Larry, is that something that CapFin will do, or do you want to work in tandem with CapFin?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
so from here, you want to weigh in on narrowing and selecting, or where do you want to go from here?
Well, first, are there any additional topics that anyone would like to have us consider as part of this list?
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
HB 244, I believe, we've asked the Investment Funds Committee to look at Treasurer's Office operations and make some recommendations. Do you anticipate that we'll be receiving interim updates or just a report at the end?
So on the House. Yeah, that's correct. Even the bill directs it at CapFin. And what's anticipated, and I think we strengthen the language a little bit, is that CapFin will once again begin almost immediately, meet with the IFC and with the Treasurer's Office to kind of form a game plan, if you will, on how we move down that road.
Okay. So then, Mr. Co-Chair, the next question is, I think Don had proposed as one of the items for us to consider whether we're going to be meeting in person or virtual. And might I suggest that between the amount of time we'll spend here during budget prep and the special session, and given that we're going to have a load for CapFin and appropriations, that virtual might be the preferred option. I know it would be for me. With some exceptions, we might have a bit of in-person here and there, but my bias.
Or we could meet in Sheridan.
Pardon?
Or we could meet in Sheridan.
Problem is, the last half of April, I'll be in Mexico, so I'll have to remote into Sheridan.
All those in favor of Mexico, raise your hand.
Where in Mexico?
It's a big country.
Yeah.
Any other topics we want to add to this? Is it not like we don't have enough to do?
Yeah.
Would the public like to comment on topics that they would like us to review? Please come on up. Welcome,
Mr.
Erin.
Chairman, good morning, members of the committee. My name is Erin Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees, and no surprise that I wanted to be here today to talk to you. We did submit and expecting we would probably see something on your interim. I'm hearing there might be something suggested in the Joint Education Committee, so it would likely be up to Management Council to decide where something might go. Here's some thoughts from my association. Sustainable funding is our top priority. And I think everyone here knows that. It was, I feel like the senators are long ways away. I can't see all of you through all of this, so I'm sorry, I'm looking weird.
If I appear distorted, it's considered a blessing.
It's just weird to have all of this up here. It was the priority of that select committee. Obviously, we didn't have an outcome that gave us a vehicle to have the conversation in front of the full bodies this session. So I'm not sure whatever the want might be in terms of a select committee, there might be some benefit to having it be discussed in front of a full committee, standing committee. So that might be something I'd ask folks to consider, and maybe that's a management council decision, I'm not sure. But sustainable funding is certainly still our top priority, and making sure that those counties that are receiving services from the community colleges in some way are contributing. And so I would suggest that maybe it's not an open-ended, maybe there's, if there's a will to put this down, maybe there's a will to put down what the result might look like as well, maybe a little structure around that. I also keep hearing conversations about governance. What is governance? It's a mess. They're disorganized. We need something different. We need a change. What does all of that mean? And I would challenge you all here to really think hard about that. If you put down governance for the community colleges, what does that mean? What are you trying to get at? Because what that does is really open it up for anything to come in there. We have a good system. We have a really good system. We do have 7 individual colleges. That's the nature of the beast. If you're looking for something else, I'd suggest it to be very structured, narrowly defined, so that there is something that people understand what we're trying to get at, rather than something being so open. Now, I'm not suggesting we don't want a different governance structure. We have one of the best and rated #1 in the country in terms of how we operate as a community college system. And I think it's important to emphasize that yet again. But it has been studied. We can hand you all of the reports that the folks over at the Community College Commission have worked tirelessly for several years now, but especially this last year, to provide information to the Select Committee on Community College Governance and Funding, to this committee, to the Joint Education Committee, to the Wyoming's Tomorrow Committee, to the Minerals Committee. So there's volumes of information on this. And so we don't have to reinvent any wheels. I think a governance ask is sometimes an easy button for the real hard issues, which is a funding issue. And so that's what I would give to the committee today. I think I would also recommend, and you can take it or however you want to, some of the things that we have talked about before this committee. If you look at what we refer to fondly as House Bill 80, it's the funding mechanism in the statutes on how the appropriations are given out in our funding model. There are some things within that I think are worth looking at. And we've talked about that. We've talked about the distance education portion, the lack of an ECA, things like that, I think deserve some attention. And so I think that's what I'd like to say. I do know Dr. Caldwell's with me here today, and she can provide more information if you have questions. But I just really ask you to be thoughtful about what this looks like on the agenda for an interim, narrowly defining what is it that you want. So it's just not a free for all, and then ends up with a result that wasn't what you sought out to get in the first place, which is what happened this last year with that select committee. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, Dr. Caldwell's here if you have specific questions that she can answer better than myself. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead. Senator Hicks.
it's my recollection the last time Management Council met, I think we've had this discussion. Management Council has continued that select committee on community college finance, and it was the intent that would continue to work all the way through this interim. That committee is currently constituted. There's some members that have gone off that will have to be replaced, but that's my recollection from our last Management Council meeting, that committee is still in place and will continue to work through the interim. I'm just wondering if maybe my recollection is wrong, but that's my understanding. It was to continue that work for another year on that funding. And there was some other language in there. We may want to look at just the language of that. If there's something, because it did include some of the governance structure, and I can't remember verbatim the language in there, but part of it was funding, part of it was governance structure within that charter of that. But I think we're on course to do that. Is there something above and beyond what that originally was authorized to do that you're asking for? I'm a little confused on that. Or is it the continuation to work on the funding and the governance structure.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I think we'd really encourage that committee, if that's the preferred vehicle, to really keep the focus. We didn't have a vehicle this session to talk about that in the bodies. The closest conversation that's being had is on Senate File 83 on the Gillette College District. And that's truly just about Gillette College, although we're hearing all of these other things coming in. So we didn't have even a vehicle this session. So if that's the case, yes, please continue that work.
Mr. Chairman. So my question then is if that select committee is going to continue the work, do they report back to whom, Mr. Chairman? Management council or to a committee?
Management council, please.
So I thought last year that the intent of that committee was to come back with some kind of recommendation this year, and it really did seem like we did just focus on new community college district. I was really hoping personally that we would approach the issue that comes before this committee every year when we go through the budget, and that's funding for community colleges, which we know is wonky. And so I really would like to see this committee more involved and try to get something moved down the road in trying to correct the funding formula to where it falls more in line nationally and meets the needs of this. I just think that we got.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Please.
I agree with my colleague from Lander, but we spent an inordinate amount of time on the Gillette College issue last year that it was a time constraint thing that really we were getting close to a couple of proposals on the funding side of it. That I think that will come out of this committee. That'd be if I had to prognosticate, my guess is we're going to have a recommendation on how to potentially do that. Still doesn't get to the governance side of the issue. And certainly, I think we can take that to management council that this would be maybe the appropriate committee to sponsor any funding legislation. I'd certainly be willing to carry that to management council, that would be the desire of this committee.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I pretty much concur with the last two members of this committee. My concern is rolling the university's governance conversation into this, which I see as, I won't say it's entirely separate, but I'm not sure that's a wise decision. If we want to focus on the community colleges, I think we're more likely to get a better outcome rather than rolling it all together.
Okay. Other public comment? Anybody else? Don't you guys want to put us to work? Do we have any public comment online?
Comment at your own risk.
Seeing none? Okay,
Mr. Co-Chair,
go ahead, please.
I apologize. We should have brought this up earlier. Senator Hicks and I had, this is more a funding concern. We'd like to find a way that non-members of JAC can rotate through a budget markup to sit in on that, maybe standing committee chairs when their agencies are up, or even just general members. It's not a real well-defined idea, but it helps, I think, when people can see the markup, they can see the big books, which you can't do on Zoom. And they can be here in the room on breaks, ask various members of JAC questions or staff so that they get a little bit of exposure. Initially, my concern was with, people that think they might want to be on appropriations at some point. Sometimes when you see the books and you see the process, that dampens the appetite. Sometimes it would sharpen it up. So, you know, we've got some folks on the Senate side that would like to have a little bit of exposure to it. I suspect that's true on the House side as well. Standing committee chairs might want to rotate through and so to cover per diem and salary for, you know, maybe a couple of days, maybe more, just so that folks can rotate through and get a little bit better exposure to it. And this also helps us try to develop a bench. And I'll defer to Senator Hicks to maybe flesh out his take on the idea.
You know, Mr. Chairman, I think my colleague did a good job on that. I think it's, as we continue to struggle with budgets and federal dollars and stuff, the more people that we understand the issues that we as a committee grapple with, particularly the committee chairs that can take that message back to the body, I think that strengthens the legislature as a whole. I think we ought to take a look at that, see what the fiscal, you know, what the fiscal cost of doing that would be. How would we structurally do that? You're certainly going to have to limit that level of participation, but you want to encourage it. I just think long-term, it would serve the legislature and the people of Wyoming much better to have a broader knowledge of the budget issues that we grapple with. And so maybe we don't have to fight some of the fights that we do on the floor with some of our committees. They'd have a greater appreciation for the deliberations and the time and the decisions that this committee ultimately makes.
Or it could amplify the number of fights and discussions we have on the floor.
Well, then obviously we weren't very pervasive in our educational process.
My cuff's
So,
Are you suggesting that we supply them with the tools?
you know, I like the idea. The question is, it would have to be in person? Would they do it via video? And do you select them so that you said markup, but you'd only have so many at one time, and then have those, you know, who they cover their particular SUs and committees? It's a useful thing to do.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I think as you look at that, I mean, to look at markup, unless you've participated in the budget discussion for the agency, markup is like, how do they do that? I mean, if you look at markup itself, it goes so fast. So unless you've been involved in the prior discussion, but you know, I think the point is, you know, it may be very, you know, the point is probably to have the committee chairs or the standing committee chairs have the opportunity to attend during the budget discussion of their agency. Then quite frankly, markup, markup virtually might be pretty interesting. You might be able to do that virtually pretty well, but I think in the budget discussion, that's a whole nother discussion. That's a whole nother issue.
Well, and we could allow them either in person or via Zoom to participate in the discussion with the agency.
Mhm.
Make sure that they've read the agency budget beforehand and then ask questions.
We could take them as a witness.
I think that would be pretty simple.
Well, at this point in time, we're just saying this would be a recommendation that we would, as a committee, take to management council to figure out what it's going to cost, what it would take to do it with the best mechanisms to facilitate that happening. So right now, we're not saying, let's do it. Let's
Yeah, well,
look
in
at it
addition-
for a year.
In addition to that, Larry, we could just say, if you choose to do that for your agency, you know, because agencies are only 2 or 3 hours at a time at the most, typically.
Except for the Department of Health. and
Yeah,
stuff.
one of the big ones, we can say, if you want to participate, just Zoom in and we'll let you can essentially sit with us. for asking
But
questions.
let's take a look at it, I guess is what we're asking.
I guess my perspective was more the agency budget discussions more so than the markup and yes, and we do see where, you know, once some that are interested come in by Zoom. There's a value to being in the room. There's a value to seeing the books. There's a value to being able to talk to staff and members on the committee and to be able to rotate through to actually observe that process, which, you know, they can do that on their own time. It just helps to cover the cost of the hotel and salary for a day. So it'll likely be some combination, but I would like to be for people to have the option of the in-person during those agency discussions. There's merit in it, even if it's not your agency of one of your two standing committees, just to see the books, the process, the questions. And you know, frankly, it's so exciting that I just hate for to deprive anybody of the opportunity to brighten their days with a budget review.
Go ahead.
I mean, it's an intriguing idea. I'm not dismissing it. I'm trying to figure out the logistics though. Just first of all, a lot of our committees have overlapping responsibilities related to various agencies. And then if we want, I'm just thinking committee chairs, if they're actually participating, knowing how hard pressed we are to complete all of the budgets in 2 weeks, what that's going to do to the timing. Because I'm personally not, I don't want to spend 3 weeks in December and 3 weeks in January getting ready for the budget session. I mean, I'll do it, but that'll be a lot of work. So anyhow, I mean, I think there are just simple logistical issues that we need to address.
So going back to our list, Mr. Co-Chair.
Senator Steinmetz.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing I had considered being new to this and coming in was that to include the chairman in the agency reviews, because I think that would be helpful as we go through agency reviews, as we go through our individual agencies. So that's something I intend to, and Representative Schwartz, we're on a lot of agencies together, so I wanted to visit with you about that. But I would like to bring the chairman in on the agency review side of things. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, further comments?
Again, Mr. Chairman, to me, the higher priority to me is simply just grooming a bench. You know, there's some folks in the Senate side that really have no interest in it. There's some that think they might have. And I think if we could cover costs for them, even if they came for 3-4 days, just to sit in on the process to see whether they've really got the appetite for it. And to the extent that they do end up on appropriations, the first time they see it won't be the first time they see it. So mine is more as kind of a succession planning. And that's my highest priority, is that we'd have the budget to be able to rotate through people that really think they might want to be on appropriations. And we know we've got some slots upcoming. Give them a chance to take a look, see. That'd be the highest priority for me personally.
So what you're discussing is a recommendation from this committee to Management Council. And so what we need to do then is just wordsmith that recommendation. So if you can work with Don, because I think we all concur with the general proposition. So let's go back to our list. And what I'd like to do first off is let's cover the issues that we know we're going to do, or continuation items, because those are already kind of on our plate and on our agenda. I think probably our number one priority is going to be the ARP or ARPA.
Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to interrupt, but we're having a hard time catching you on the audio. Is there any way I can get you to move your microphone closer?
I could turn it on. So just say no. So number one, we've got the ARP funds and funding. Like we discussed earlier, I mean, the chances are we'll meet it probably 2 or 3 times on that between now and July. So that will be, to a large part, what our first couple of meetings will be dealing with. And then we've got, we have a couple working groups that are already in existence that we may need to add people to. One is the data book working group. And then there's the mental health work group, is there, right?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
if House Bill 38 passes, I would suggest we continue that, but I think we could probably, I don't know, we could probably have a couple of us, one from the House, one from the Senate, just stay abreast of what they move forward with on that. I think it could reduce size.
And the other working group that we are contemplating, at least on the House side, is that public works contract and the pre-qualification. Basically taking that bill and then breaking it down into a more detailed study that on the House side, the vice chair will lead on our side.
Mr. Co-Chair, we did have an IT working group. Is that one?
Right, and that's the next one is the,
Okay, before we go any further, I'd ask, if I'm wanted, I'll stay on the MHSA. I'd like to be off the data book subgroup. I don't feel like I'm making a contribution there.
with regards to ETS, we made various requests. And Don, if you can kind of walk through briefly what we asked them to do, what they're anticipating to report to us.
What page is that on?
ETS is on tab 2, bottom 2.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in February, the Joint Appropriations Committee sent a list of items for ETS to respond to. You did not provide for a second year of the Barry Dunn work, but you did ask ETS to provide the committee IT project evaluation criteria, executive branch cooperation and feedback, any rules promulgated by ETS, a list of the 23-24 traditional budget requests, a list of the major IT project requests for the subsequent biennium, as well as preliminary observations on the anticipated funding estimates, and finally, a detailed overview of the Barry Dunn recommendations and their status of implementation. I believe you requested this to be provided 3 weeks prior to the first JAC meeting or no later than August 1st.
In my recollection, Don, is that just because of the nature of, number one, getting the report out, the limitations on the report, and the fact that there were still really kind of in a transition startup mode, that they weren't able to, basically they're saying we need more time in order to know the full ramifications of their reorganization, implementation of the Barry Dunn things. I think they said they were implementing them, but they weren't at a point that they could really report on the success or just the total outcomes of that. Is that fair?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that is fair, but in respect to timing, I think there are two things. One is some time to digest and implement the recommendations. I think you've accurately stated my understanding of that. The second issue is based on the recommendations. I think the executive branch, including the governor's office, had some concern as to the calendar, meaning it was a little bit front-loaded,
Right.
Not allowing the governor an opportunity to vet some of these issues prior to moving them forward.
So in terms of going forward with ETS, is it more of a reporting and an updating of what our prior requests are? So it's, I mean, that would be half a day, maybe once or twice versus any extensive additional work.
Mr. Chairman, I think that is correct. I think the one actionable item is I would anticipate the update on the forthcoming funding requests might be a opportunity to dig in a little deeper.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I kind of see two things moving forward at the same time, and that being how we move forward with the ETS and the response of the governance within that agency, and as it determines how we implement, fund, and approve these IT needs. The other part of that is we have a couple of these IT needs that are moving forward while we get bits in place, and particularly the RIS system with YDOT. I, I am really still struggling a lot with that, and I would like to request that as part of this, and I don't have a problem with maybe having a committee be working on it, but I'd really appreciate having is one of these meetings before the committee of the whole, having a broader group of people besides, and it's no offense to YDOT and their group, but they're saying we've gone to this consulting firm and it's going to take us 5 years to put in an $80 million system that's going to require $1.4 million a year to maintain. And yes, you are correct, JAC, that by the time we get it implemented, it'll be antiquated. And then we get out working in our other associations around the state, and you hear industry and people who are deeply involved in IT saying, that's the craziest thing we've ever heard. Why does it take 5 years? Why is it costing $80 million? And I'd like to have that conversation in front of us from both perspectives a little more, because I'm really struggling with the price tag on that when there are so many others who would argue that.
Second.
Mr. Kutcher,
Go.
you got 8 minutes before we gavel in. And so, I mean, we've got a full list. I don't know exactly how you want to proceed with this. Obviously, I don't think we're gonna get it wrapped up in the next 8 minutes.
So on,
But what I do have a couple things I would like to say. I think that this year in particular, that we need to be really careful about what we do and exercise a significant amount of restraint. We've already spent a good half of January on legislative business. We've spent all of March. We're now going to extend it to April. We have a special session coming, which is going to require significant input by this committee. And by the time special session is done, you're down to having August, September, and October to do work. And so, and somewhere in all that, some of us still have to make a living and pay a mortgage. So we just need to be, as we think about this, let's just keep that in mind as a body, as a group. Thank you, Mr. Coacher.
I second that too.
so just real quickly, with regards to let's go to page 1. Would it be useful to have the basically A&I come and spend a couple hours just walking through that issue at some time in the latter part of the year? Or do we want to just delay that?
Mr. Coacher, I think there's a couple things that are just kind of incumbent upon what we do. I think that the first one, I don't think it's a long thing, but I think it certainly affects some of the budget markup that we do. Also involved in that, I think we should also, when we talk to them about that, we ought to visit with them a little bit about statewide cost allocation and how that's working.
Well, and it seems to me that this is a problem that we ought to give probably the governor the first crack at it to see if he's got a plan or agenda on it. And we could ask for what his ongoing plans are, if he has any and then kind of have them formulate a response that they could get back to us by September, October type of thing.
Well, exactly.
So Don, could we do that? And let's go to the next one. I mean, the next one's interesting to me. The question is this for another day? Is this something that CapFin can do? But it's an interesting topic.
Mr. Chairman, I think we kick that over to CapFin if you wanted to. I do think it's something this committee ought to take a look at, but if we're stretched for time, and I don't know what all we have in CapFin yet, but certainly I think the CapFin's capable, because they're kind of the ones that interface with the IFC anyway. I think it would fit well with CapFin also.
And I think we've kind of discussed that I think we're going to go back to Management Council on the community college front. With that, on the budgetary simplification,
Just if backtrack just very quickly, I'm on that IT subcommittee. If we keep that in place, I'd like to be off that one as well. I'm getting so overcommitted on legislative stuff. And I thought the people we had were doing a great job.
Where are you at, Mr. Chairman?
so now we're on page 4 on the budget simplification and transparency. I mean, that could be a captain issue as well. We could bring the bill to get rid of the BRA and have that be a joint appropriations committee bill if we choose to. That's a pretty simple thing to do. Taking a couple hours to have a breakdown of where we can really make any simple first step changes, I think is a useful thing, but we can actually do that in both committees can get updated on it and addressed it.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Co-Chair, and if I can ask Dawn, I think when we start changing around with the budget reserve account, doesn't that have a bit of a ripple effect through a significant number of bills regarding budget authority and reserves and a number of other things?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. While the concept is pretty straightforward, a bill to eliminate the budget reserve, and it has been presented, I think, 5 years ago, will be fairly extensive.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that topic could also be reviewed by the Revenue Committee, as they can look at diversions and such versus just raising revenue. And so not just cap fin, but I think revenue could be utilized in that regard.
They're going to want something to do that actually passes.
At least gets out of committee this time.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we trust them guys on revenue. They just want to raise taxes. So
So then the next on our list, I think that Senate File 121, that is a cap fin issue. So I think that's where that will end.
yeah,
And the lot in House Bill 244 will be a cap fin. I think we've covered all of these for the most part. Go ahead.
On that Public Works work group, could I just request if, and I guess I'm asking more from the Senate side. I worked on those last contracting bills we've done. That's what I'd kind of like to be in this. It's Representative Stiss bill that we're trying to work through, and Representative Simpson lives in that world. Would you mind if we kind of just put some recommendations on how to fix that and bring that back to the committee as a whole, or to this committee? And would welcome anybody on there, but sometimes we don't need, it's up to you.
I think Senator Drew would like to be on that, participate. Okay.
Democrats, it would help my
Okay. Anything else? It's 10 o'clock. So I think we've covered it in generalities. We'll kind of finalize that up, Don.
and then, Mr. Chairman, when do we want to come back and prioritize those for the committee? Because in high likelihood, management council, they may say you just don't have enough staff and time to do that. So it wouldn't hurt for us to have our priority schedule in place.
Well, and I think the priorities are pretty simple. We'll do the ARP, ETS, retirement, the working groups. I mean, that's really up to the working groups and how much time and effort they want to put into it. So,
Well, I think that's something the two chairmen could hash out.
okay.